Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be day 7 of the 12 Days of Litmus. The 12 Days of Litmus is hosted by Stripped Cover Lit. I will link to their announcement video below. And the day 7 prompt is the literary thing that's stuck in your craw. I've gotten behind on the prompts this week because I have a lot going on right now, but I realized I was talking to Miriam from Behind Lines in Life on Twitter this morning, and I had had the same misunderstanding of this prompt that she did. And as soon as she mentioned that, and I went and Googled what stuck in my craw actually means, I came up with an idea for something that has actually been irritating me this year in the literary world. And that is a dismissiveness towards works that combine visual and written arts. So just this past Wednesday, I read Sea Prayer, which is a picture book. And when I finished it and added it on Goodreads, I went and took a look at the reviews. And I discovered a number of one-star reviews, not from people who didn't enjoy the book, but from people who were disappointed that it was a picture book, and secondly, that it was priced at $10 American or £7. Incidentally, it's $20 Canadian. And while I can appreciate the marketing issue that people who bought this assuming it was a novel rather than a picture book would be complaining about, to complain about the price as though the only thing involved in the creation of this is the writing itself and not the art is incredibly dismissive, and also shows that they don't buy a lot of picture books, because a standard children's picture book is in the same price range. So I found that incredibly disappointing, because the art in this book is lovely, and judged as a picture book, it is beautiful. And the bigger example that I saw pop up a number of times this year was the controversy around Sabrina, the graphic novel that was on the Booker long list this year. I have no issue with the complaint that as a graphic novel it should not be eligible for a novel prize. And for anyone whose complaints stopped at that, I have no issue with that. But what I found appalling was the number of people who went on to essentially dismiss comics as a form, and specifically describing comics as a lesser art form compared to prose, but also compared to a number of other forms. Which, while personal preferences obviously exist, one can state those preferences without insulting an entire art form. And something that brought this back to mind recently was Jeet Here's biography of Françoise Mouly, In Love with Art. And this book makes the suggestion that the move towards more serious Anglo-American comics from the 1970s onward was possible because Mouly had grown up with the Franco-Belgian style album comics, which are just a higher quality package, such that even when the comics content is very similar, as in the two books I'm showing you in the background here, which are both books that I've purchased in the past month, and are very similar science fiction-y type stories, by virtue of having a hardcover album versus a floppy magazine-style book, one naturally has more respect for the material, which I thought is an interesting way to think of that, and it did make me wonder if that makes Anglophone individuals more likely to be dismissive of comics as a form. Because this book that we're looking at in the background here is more than 50 years old and is still in great shape, whereas a floppy-style comic that hasn't been bagged and boarded of this age, and people weren't bagging and boarding 50 years ago, probably wouldn't be in this condition, which is really what led to collector comics. And even outside of the Francophone tradition, a bound comic, even if it's not a hardcover, as the one we're looking at in the background here, which is also 50 years old, also is in better shape. And a lot of people who swear by not minding the condition of books, or specifically being proud of not minding the condition of books, often do look at comics in a dismissive way. There's a lot of crossover between those two groups. And I think it's interesting that within Anglo-American comics, books like Scott McCloud's Sculptor that I'm flipping through here do tend to be published in nicer forms like this hardcover book. I think it's interesting that as respect for comics has become more mainstream in the Anglophone world, we are seeing these kind of hardcover copies of books that were originally published as floppies, like this 30th anniversary Hellblazer edition that I'm flipping through here. But then, of course, you compare that to this more than 30-year-old leather-bound edition of Tintin, and there's still a ways to go in terms of just format of the Anglophone style comics. Now, to be clear, I don't 100% buy into the idea that format plays such a heavy role in the perception of the form, but I did think it was an interesting point that I hadn't seriously considered before, and it did make me think about where some of the attitudes towards sequential art as a lesser art form have come from. In any case, I take no issue with people who just don't enjoy comics, because obviously some people are just not interested in the visual and word combination, but people who view them as a lesser art form, full stop, both comics and illustrated fiction, that does irritate me to no end, which I think means that it's stuck in my craw. That's it for now. Ciao.